everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Breaking Through the Data Bottleneck, a customer case study in Agile ETL. My name is Rory Carvalho, and I'm the marketing coordinator at LavaStorm. I have with me today Mark Marinelli, CTO at LavaStorm, and Carrie Reitenauer, Director of Solutions Architecture at Fairpoint Communications. Please note that we will be recording this webinar and we'll be sending you all a link to the recording. Also, please use the Q&A panel to ask your questions. We've set aside some time at the end of the webinar for Q&A, and we'll address as many as time allows. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mark.
Hello, everyone. This is Mark from LavaStorm. Because this is a bit of a sequel of sorts to the last webinar, I'm just going to ground us with a little preamble reminding us of the sort of tenets of Agile ETL as contrasted to traditional waterfall approaches to set the context for the meat of the conversation, which will be an interactive discussion with Kerry about how he has applied his practical knowledge over the last few years to surmount some of the challenges to adopting an Agile approach and some of the benefits that he and his organization have reaped from doing that. So to set the stage here, last time we talked about bottlenecks. Just like in traffic, if the toll booth can only let one lane through, we've got a problem. And we see these sorts of bottlenecks throughout our business. Oftentimes, we can see them in the way that we try to work with data. Historically, there was a bottleneck all around that business intelligence platforms, you'd have to wait in line behind everyone else to get a new report. And if you wanted new data, you'd have to wait in line behind everyone else to get into the data warehouse. Those things are changing, and eventually we will be incrementing towards removing that bottleneck in toto so that we can all go as fast as we'd like with our data. The good news is that on the business intelligence side, there's been a raft of new products and some upskilling by users who, armed with something like a Tableau or a Qlik or a Spotfire and a few sources of data, can build their own reports, can build very rich, interactive visualizations and analyses of their data that historically they had to rely on technical users to build for them. And this has, unleashed a lot of creativity and a lot of business improvement. It has also been very popular. So once one person sees that they can build their own reports and perform their own analyses and they want to share them with other people want to get in on the act. So now you've got whole departments across enterprise organizations who have armed themselves with these tools and are working in these platforms. Sorry, we got a feedback in the channel that we had some bad echo here. So we're going to do something to try to mitigate that. So we've got a lot of different users working with these tools, but they're still beholden to a traditional supply chain of data on the other side of the data sets that they're using. You can have a whole bunch of people who, with a couple of spreadsheets and maybe a database, can get pretty far down the field with one of these tools. But when you have rich data sets from a variety of systems, each of these systems were built independently, don't speak the same language, don't provide the same interfaces, don't provide the same data formats, someone has to be able to corral all of these data and get them out to those end users to make them useful. And much as we've been able to improve the speed with which end users can self-serve, we haven't really done a great job of improving the speed with which IT departments can service those requests. That is really the subject of our conversation today. And really the net of this is that you can have an awful lot of agility out in your BI and visualization landscape, but if you're still using a waterfall process, meaning one where you start a big project and you collect a bunch of requirements and you eventually, some weeks or months later, start servicing some sort of outcomes, you've really constrained the way that you're working to being waterfall analytics. Agile question asking at the end of the process does not itself comprise an agile analytical process when the mechanism by which we get additional data to make more informed or interesting analyses, the mechanism by which we get refreshes of data and have a wider footprint of data, if that's still waterfall, if that still takes a very long time, we really haven't achieved our goal of getting through that bottleneck. So I'm going to transition right now to having set the stage there as the problem that we're trying to solve, to talk to someone who's solved it. Before I get into a Q&A period with Kerry and ask a few different questions about different aspects of the challenge and how he was able to achieve benefit, Kerry, can I ask you just to briefly introduce yourself and your firm so everybody knows kind of, what perspective you're coming from?
Yeah, this is Kerry Reitnauer. I'm the Director of Solutions Architecture, Business Intelligence for Fairpoint Communications. We're a large telco in the northern New England area. We have hundreds of thousands of lines in service. We have all the challenges of a telecom company, especially on the data side. So that's kind of where the problem begins for me.
All right, well, let's get into that problem. So, challenges. The first thing, could you describe the life cycle of a data request in your previous structure? Someone out in the business wants for a report that itself requires some new data. How many systems, people, activities, etc., were involved before you could actually provision what that business user wanted?
I kind of consider this time the wild, wild west of data here at Fairpoint. We just converted all new systems from an ILEC, and so we had lots of complications of data. I was brought on as a contractor to help with system flow issues, and the business people were essentially desperate for data. They really didn't know what was going on in the systems. So it became a very siloed approach. They became friends with the IT developers, and we're able to get them to write a report to tell them how many widgets we sold, or how many widgets flowed through. We're talking about 5 or 6 major systems here for us, from ordering to billing to inventory to outside plant. There was no centralized architecture in the very beginning. I can remember many times where I was called in as I was starting to learn the data as a contractor, where it was like, okay, we got these 2 reports. Can you tell us, which one's right? So because it was coming out of different systems, and then you'd also have each business owner would ask a different question, get a different answer. Those type of things were happening. So there was many passive entry, some directly to the developer, some phone, some email, some was put into Remedy and managed that way. So it was just kind of a hodgepodge.
So 2 questions off of that. One was, if it was coming in this way, I'm assuming you didn't have a centralized sort of process for prioritizing any of this stuff. How was it prioritized? Was it entirely ad hoc, or was there some way for you to get perceived business value as somebody putting their thumb on the scale for one of these requests?
No, there was no prioritization. It usually, if someone wanted something to prioritize, it ended in an escalation and trying to get someone to do something. There just wasn't really a centralized source for data. At best, we started to have an operational data store in place that was a copy of production, but it was not simplified data or enriched data in any way. So it was truly a tough process. There was none. I would say there's none.
So I'm sure the answer is going to be variable here, but can you give me sort of order of magnitude of how long it would take if somebody said, hey, I really want to look here, the data weren't already available, the report wasn't already written, how long was the typical cycle time before somebody started seeing something useful?
Weeks. You definitely, you make a request, and let's say the data was not in the operational data store for the reporting team. So there was a reporting team, but they were as challenged because they didn't understand the systems. They were all new to them also. So they'd have to make requests to the operational data store team to get the data model changed and get new data out of production, and that would take 3 weeks alone just to get new data into their hands, because they shouldn't be querying production.
So with that sort of, fragmented supply chain of data, different people, different systems, all having to talk to each other, and you have to somehow convey accurate requirements about what it is the business user is actually asking. How often do you think you got it right the first time when you traversed all of that to get somebody data, and how often was it actually when they saw that first outcome they said, "Ooh, I asked the wrong question," or "This would be a lot more interesting if I got something else"?
It was always the latter. I mean, I remember the reporting team complaining to me before I was involved with reporting. They're like, we give them data, then they want more. The requirements change. They add something. They're never happy with. They asked for this. I gave them that. They didn't like. It was that constantly that conversation was going on.
So that's as we covered in our last webinar, and I think is broadly sort of a growing awareness in the market. Breaking down that big, long process of weeks and a lot of different conversations and requirements communication into shorter cycles in a small agile process of constantly sort of showing a little bit to the business user, having them validate that, getting a little bit more, that sort of where people are trying to go. And I know you've done that, so a little bit of a spoiler there, but I want to get into presupposing that you wanted to move toward that type of model, what sort of challenges or barriers you had. So I'm going to start with the mindset. We talk about barriers to adoption of more agile processes being a combination of requiring a new mindset, requiring potentially a new skill set, and requiring almost assuredly a new tool set. So I'll start with mindset. Was an organization hesitant to work differently? Obviously it sounds like things were somewhat chaotic, but when you said, I want to do something different, we want to change the way that we work, what was holding people back, if anything? Was it, inertia, we're just sort of used to working this way, or were there actual risks that people thought about adopting a new methodology? Can you describe where people were hesitant to adopt a new model?
I'd say there are two areas. As I mentioned, the business owners kind of developed friendships with IT to get data they needed and felt confidence in from that IT developer. So there was that friendships that were starting to develop in the early years that you had to break down. You had to break their confidence of that and show them how, get their confidence built up in what we were building and how we can even take them farther than just looking at one system. Here, you can see it across all the systems. You can see how the order fell out, where it fell out, that kind of stuff. And another piece that came into play is, within the second or so year of this journey, a data warehouse was built. And this is all, again, before I got into reporting. And, they were claiming this to be the answer to everyone's problems. It was stood up, and people started to depend on the reports coming out of the data warehouse. So again, we had to go through that confidence shift once that data warehouse became under my ownership. So we had to switch them over and actually point out where the problems are in the data warehouse to get them to move forward.
So would you say part of it is people didn't, until they saw that there was a better way, and I guess as evidenced by you showing them a broader set of data than the individual silo they were working in, but as you showed, until you showed people that they could see outside of their own silo, was there just sort of we don't know what we don't know, or there was just a lack of imagination around how they could work better?
Well, a lot of times it's not my org. Look, I'm looking in the system my organization is responsible for. I handled that order properly. Or it made it through my system, not my problem. It's people were busy. People had a lot of stuff to figure out. Again, the all new systems world was kind of the biggest headache they had to deal with. So you had people, trying to just get stuff off their plate. If someone's complaining about order flow through or whatever, look, I'm getting the orders done that I need to get done. Not my problem, right?
So you showed people that I guess it was their problem by looking at the knock-on effects of whatever they were seeing in the rest of the system or the rest of the business. How long did it take you once you started showing people there was a better way and giving them a wider view before they started, I won't say distrusting the data warehouse, but no longer saw that ODS as the be-all and end-all and kind of wanted to start doing things the new way?
It took a couple months. It was kind of an interesting situation, right? Again, I wasn't even responsible for reporting. At the time, I was the data architect of the company. So as I was solving system problems and being able to put data together and do data discovery with LavaStorm, I started to be able to answer questions that no one could answer before, that were more, how did the order perform throughout the enterprise, not just how did the order perform for this particular task. Once people started seeing that, you start to open eyes, and then when they question things, you could actually drill farther and bring back more data, and kind of just it was always a data-driven discussion versus my gut tells me my numbers are right and yours aren't. It's more like, well, I can tell you what happened to your order after you touched it, and that type of thing were some of the early conversations, and that took months. It wasn't like I wasn't set out with the goal of, hey, go build a BI platform and start solving some of these problems. It was, I have my other job over here, and I'm starting to see where maybe what I'm doing over here can fit in the BI space also.
So I guess a combination of getting people things faster, getting them things that they'd never seen before, and getting them things that they actually trusted, because speed and accuracy can often be, at odds with each other. That was the kind of the breakthrough moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Confidence, I think, based on where we're going with the questions, I think confidence is going to be something I'm going to point out a lot. Confidence in the data really does drive a change.
So that's, I'll take advantage of that as a segue into confidence in the people. If we assume that we've got buy-in and that people are amenable to doing things a different way, you still need a mixed set of skills to actually collaboratively solve the problem, right? You've got fragmented knowledge, and that different areas of the business have different subject matter expertise, and you've also got mixed skills in that you've got some people who are very comfortable in a spreadsheet but not so much in a database, and then you've got people who are very comfortable in a database or in a programming environment but don't know as much about the business side of things. So every organization has a varied set of technical skills and a varied knowledge base across individuals and teams. How were you able to get everybody collaborating to apply all of these different skills to build the sort of new data reports and new data applications that you're talking about?
Yeah, and I think I kind of starting to allude on it was very organic, right? I didn't have a boss who said, go build a BI platform. I was never charged with that. Kind of a scenario that I like to use when I talk about this that kind of opened my eyes up to the process and how we could make it better and how we could start being more collaborative was, we had a scenario where the marketing department was getting a report that wasn't telling them the whole story, right? And they basically said, look, you're starting to understand how these things are interacting. Can we start looking at, our customers and when their promos are expiring? We don't have a valid report. We don't know how to interact with this customer base. We need information that's better than this. So we basically started out with the query that they started with, and I had meetings with them every day. I actually had the CMO was on these calls, including the ordering expert, the billing expert, a provisioning person, and then some data people. and we all just not sat around, we were on WebExes, we were looking at data, and we were analyzing the data row by row. We were saying, okay, this customer looks like this to me. And the person would go in the inventory system, and the person would go into the customer database and say, oh, nope, that's not right. Or they'd go in the billing system, oh, it looks like you're missing this charge. And we just iterated daily, taking all that feedback and saying, oh, you know what, it would be really helpful if we knew this about the customer also, because that'll help us with our mailing list. You know, that iteration happened daily for about an hour a day. And, you know, all the different knowledge bases put together with data in front of them. And we can iterate on the data, and we can move them along throughout that week. And then, you know, the next week we only had to meet once or twice, and we kind of just kept enriching it, and they started using it. And that's when we kind of were like, the light bulb started going off. That's a simple data mart. What we just built there is a simple data mart that they understand, that they can look at, they get a ton of information from at a glance. And that was kind of like the catalyst for the whole thing as we started the evolution.
That sounds, a lot of what you just said sounds like sort of capital A, Agile. You know, you've got a sort of scrum of people together, meeting on a frequent basis, collaborating in real time to solve a problem. But you said it happened organically. This is not you trying to, you know, shoehorn yourself into some other process or anything. It's just, you know, what worked for you. How were you able to get those busy people, you know, including a CMO, to give you an hour a day, or, you know, maybe it was less than an hour a day at sometimes, but, you know, initially, until you, obviously, once you started being successful, you got that buy-in, but how did you propose to them without being able to point to a book and say, you know, this is the way to do it? How did you co-opt them to be able to do this together?
I guess when you have an executive on a call, people are going to show up. So it really was driven by the CMO. She was challenged by the data she was getting into her organization, and she was a very data-driven CMO. So, you know, she wanted to be involved, and that made everybody else want to be involved. So executives have that ability to want people to get involved.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's definitely a lesson you can extrapolate there, I think, as we've seen across our customer base and across the industry. There's more, you know, you stand up a chief data officer or someone who has that sort of executive oversight over the processes that you're describing, or in your case, it's just someone existing that doesn't have that title, just taking it upon themselves to want to drive towards a more data-driven business. But executive buy-in can be the initial spur, I suppose, of this type of work. So you got everybody together, and you've looking at a screen with a bunch of SQL script, however well documented it is, and an assemblage of outputs in spreadsheets or tabular form. That only gets you so far. How can you describe the sort of mechanics of the tool set that you were using to foster this conversation?
Yeah, we talked about some of I think we already hit on like our old operational data store, which was kind of clunky and weeks worth of trouble to get something changed. And then we had a data warehouse, which was separate and sitting on top of that, essentially, that took all day to even load, and many complex stages, and very troublesome for us. We had a third-party scorecarding application that was supposed to be the truth, but that was sitting on top of the data warehouse, which took all day to load. So then the scorecard was never right. All these data reports running around and data ownership, that we didn't leverage any of that once we started these discussions, right? To me, in my mind, again, I wasn't even responsible for reporting. I was looking at the data using, the LavaStorm tool to build my discovery, and we started essentially just at that point using LavaStorm to solve it, and put that data out there, and agilely change the data every night. And not every night, not that I was working through the night, I was just making the changes in the afternoon. Next morning they could see the changes. We were able to just use that one tool to iterate through that agile process.
So prior to adopting, what we at LavaStorm obviously believe is the best tool for the job, had you tried using your existing, ETL processes, and it sounds like some of your, querying some of your databases and stuff, had you tried using that and just found that it wasn't up to muster for the way that you wanted to organize the work?
Because I come from 20 years of software development, custom development in Unix environment. I've done tons of scripting and SQL and, bashing data together on the SQL, using Linux and just messy stuff, right? So that was my background. And honestly, prior to this, starting to do the Agile stuff with the CMO, I had already been introduced to the product, and I was, immediately struck by the visual capabilities. And I was like, wow, all that stuff was in my head when I was using Linux and writing all these scripts and joining files together, and now I can actually see it visually on a screen. So I was that was kind of my stepping stone into all this.
And I guess, you being able to see that is great, but others being able to see that as they worked with you is really that, breakthrough to getting other people directly involved in the conversation rather than just, giving you requirements and having you go off build it maybe faster yourself, but by yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I always find when I was getting feedback like, oh, you're missing this, or the data's not right here, being able to go back in and click on something, double click on something, and find out what the data was before a particular transformation was vital in me being able to move the data set forward.
So broadly, attributes of the tool set that you needed to use were a visual sort of representation of all of the steps in data transform and logic, and something that was approachable enough for a business user who would not have known all of the scripting and everything you talked about, but you could explain it to them without having to leave the tool set.
Correct. Yep.
So we spent quite a bit of time, going through down memory lane for you of where things were difficult and some of the ways that you adapted your the institutional mindset, and you got everybody's skills together and the right tools and adopted a new process for building these apps. I'd like to now transition over to why you did it. What the benefits from all of this are, so that everybody who's listening here can take away some real world examples of improvements to the way that the business can get through its data. So I'm going to start by talking about we a few minutes ago talked about what it used to be like. What you had this sort of parochialism, and you had people with their favorite person in IT would go and get them a report, and it was chaotic. Can you describe now, when a new project stands up, if there's a new area of the business that wants to do some data-driven decision-making and build some reports and requires a rich set of data and analyses underneath that, when they come to you now, what does that look like? How do you service that project as contrasted to how you did it before?
Yeah, we've adopted the IT's centralized CR process. We basically have our own workflow in it. Business intelligence CR comes in. It comes directly to my team. It does not have to go through, kind of that more waterfall methodology. Immediately we start the dialogue with the customer. And, to me, it really comes down to what question are you trying to ask? A lot of times, and this is how the people have been conditioned, and at least at Fairpoint, and I've seen this other places where, they have some understanding of data, business people. So they say, can you tell me how many of these there are? And then what I want to try and do, and I have my team do, is we start the dialogue and say, what's the question you're trying to answer before I give you that data? Because we might have a better place for you to get that from. We may have, a better understanding of how that data relates to something else that you're really trying to answer. So it's really start that dialogue with the CR. And then we, as a team, we review those requests, and then we kind of figure out where they fit in the architecture. We figure out if that's something we could solve with Tableau without doing any changes to the data marts. If we have to make an incremental change to the data mart is the other one, and then if we need a new data mart because we don't have the right level of granularity or the right details to answer particular questions. So kind of ends up in 3 different categories.
But when you say new data mart, you're not saying, well, we're going to start a months-long project to build a brand new data schema and populate it and do all of the replication and everything. You're talking about that same thing you mentioned before. Then you can stand up new data marts on the fly, basically day to day. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I use the word data mart because people understand it's summarized data. The data's been through some transformation. It's been enriched in some way, but not to say that it flows through a traditional data warehouse. We use the tool, we do the iteration where we do the learning of here's how you've been getting your data. Let's make sure we understand that the way you've been querying the data is getting you the right answer, and then we'll enrich on it what we need to support maybe other projects or whatever. Is it some object that we currently don't have a data mart for? Is it an existing object that we have, but we're just going at a different level of granularity? Those kind of questions get answered, and we kind of iterate, and we start moving through to the process of building it out, which, some of them could be as simple as a day. It's not, it all depends on what the data set is, what we're trying to build out.
So typically when people start realizing these benefits, your department like yours becomes a victim of its own success. Right now, everybody wants some. How do you now prioritize? And I'm assuming that the volume of these inbound CRs is going up. How do you prioritize that backlog now that you have just a different way of taking on these projects?
It's kind of funny, yeah. Especially in the couple months ago, we started doing Tableau training. I think I mentioned we have Tableau sitting on top of the data mart, so that's kind of our customer-facing visualization tool. We started doing Tableau training, and we kind of saw that people's eyes lighting up as we put some of the simple data marts in front of them and started showing them how they can answer their own questions. And so we saw a lot of questions about how to use Tableau that came out after that. So there was a higher volume. But what we're actually seeing, and I just kind of went back and looked at this a couple of days ago, we're starting to see a little bit less of CR creation because we have people now starting to answer some of their own questions in Tableau. So, that's the whole goal from our perspective, from an architecture perspective, is do we have enough good quality data sets in place that these people can start answering their own questions? And now the CRs are coming in as, I couldn't figure out how to do this. I need this data element, and then we can figure out, is it already in the data set, or do we need to add it to enhance the MART a little bit to make that happen? So, it's changing the conversation, but that CR process that we have helps us line up capacity within my team and stuff too. So I think that was your initial question, but it's kind of funny how Tableau has changed the dynamic a little bit for some of our highly analytical users. They're starting to answer their own questions. So it's actually kind of reducing some of the simpler questions into my organization.
So you're getting maybe as many CRs, but they've done more of the work for you. You've kind of offloaded some of that, and you're getting more sort of pointed questions that are easier for you to take care of. Yeah.
Yeah, and it usually, if it's not how to do it in Tableau question, now it's okay, we need new data to solve a new problem. So we're getting it. The great thing is you start to get business users out of their daily grind and starting to ask different questions, and they're getting data now to answer their questions instead of spending time getting the data. They're actually answering the questions with the data. So it's kind of the momentum we're starting to see.
Yeah, so let me use that as an entree into the next point here is, this overarching business improvements. We just talked about how you can take on new projects and how that's different, and you can, address a volume of new projects and prioritize better. Overarching business improvements, like how has the business at large, outside of your team, probably, working fewer nights and weekends and your consumers of your data being happier, how's the business at large benefited from the improvements that your team has implemented? We see faster time to market or more agility, and that they can introduce new initiatives or new products or anything because they know that the data's got their back in tracking whether they're successful. Can you walk through some of the real tangible benefits that the business at large has seen from the work that your team has been doing with them?
Yeah, I think I'd point on two areas. I think we'll start with operations. When we first rolled out Tableau a year or two ago, we just hit a point in the company where we went through a strike. So our operations team was so thirsty for data, so hungry, needing to know what was going on out in the field. We were able to put some dashboards in place in front of them with Tableau over that weekend. Like, they went on strike on Friday, and by Monday we had turned up some things where they're able to see hourly what was going on out in the field. They were able to see where the work was, where they needed to put the people, and really drive the workforce based on data instead of gut. And even the system they use to manage some of the work outside didn't have dashboards and didn't have capabilities to see all the work together in one place. So we built that stuff, turned it up, and by Monday morning we were already able to show them things they'd never seen. And obviously once the strike ended, when we came back to work, all that stuff stayed in place, and they love it. And we have VPs driving the business every day out of Tableau, and really understanding what's going on and understanding how long it takes to do a job, how many jobs we get done in a day, where all the work is, where do I need to send people. Just operationally, they are data driven way more than they were before. And then on the marketing side, this was always one of those things for us before we had the platform where we'd wait till the month completed, and then we would get reports, and we'd see how many ads and how many disconnects we had, and what's the net ads of a particular product that we're concerned with. Now, throughout the week, they can go in and see what's the order trend. They can see if we're trending negative, before we get to the end of the month, and see if there's anything causing that negative trend. Do we need to interject here? Do we need to, go look at a problem, or are there, it's just giving them data earlier, quicker, so they can act on it and really drive the business.
What about, all right, so I'll go back to your team for a second. Have you been able to change the way that your team works in terms of, I ask because a lot of our customers, they've had a lot of their IT and data architects so consumed with that report construction and data provisioning activity that they can't do some of the other sort of higher value work in the IT department, architecting new systems and the stuff that really is what everybody wants to do. Have you been able to, sort of redeploy your forces at all since you've, lowered the resource cost of servicing the business data?
Yeah, last year I put changed my organization around a little bit, and I focused on a small group that does architecture, so basically making sure that the data is moved to all the right places on time, and making sure there's safeguards in place. And then I re-architected the other part of the team that was considered IT reporting, but now it's really business intelligence development, where they support the use of Tableau. They do the training of Tableau. They interact with the customers with Tableau questions. They help triage the CRs that are coming in and help us determine if architecture is needed or if it's just Tableau changes. And then there's still some old-fashioned reporting that's going on for like regulatory. We have to produce certain spreadsheets that go out, so they're still responsible for that. So I tried to break the team down into architecture, which is governing the data and the quality of the data and making sure every day we deliver quality. And then the other part of the team is the BI development and working with the customers. And even to the point where sometimes after training, we'll pair up one of my developers and have them go sit with the individual users and have them work with them through a Tableau problem, ask a question, get an answer, help them get that answer and solve it, and work with them sitting next to them. We try and do that for a couple of weeks. We'll spend like an hour with an analyst until they get comfortable, and then they start to come back to us, and we have Tableau Tuesdays where my team presents, did you know this about Tableau? Did you try this? And then we have them bring questions to us. So we're trying to keep Tableau fresh, so that the BI development team is doing a great job trying to keep and enforce the Tableau mindset and get them working with the data.
So you said a word in there twice, governance. You said it a couple of times now, and that's, anytime we talk to anybody about this, great, we're Agile, we're offloading more of this sort of, requirements gathering and testing and validation to the business, but your team is still ultimately beholden to making sure that everybody's asking the right questions of the right data. How have you implemented governance processes so that these more, self-sufficient and autonomous users are not running afoul of, the clean, curated data sets that you're trying to get to them?
You still have people that can mess around in Tableau and get the wrong answer, but, the governance I refer to is mostly in building the data marts, like the ETL process. Don't start this ETL job until this other ETL job is done. Don't, the ODS didn't load all the way last night, so, don't start these jobs because you'll corrupt the data. So it's really, the governance I'm referring to is around the Agile ETL process. So we want to make sure we have dependencies in place and know them and make sure we don't corrupt the data for the users. You're always going to have a little bit of a problem when you give a powerful tool like Tableau to some business users. They might get the wrong answer. So that's why we try and work with them to make sure they understand, make sure you look at all the completed orders, or make sure you look at all the completed trouble tickets, that those type of filters that can cause erroneous answers.
So that dovetails in with the last point I wanted to bring up was, it's great. You started Agile, you're bringing in new projects faster, you can service them faster, you're getting these benefits faster, time to market, more agility, better resource allocation. But none of that, all of that falls down if then you take what you built and you put it in a sort of lockbox where nobody can change it, because obviously the business context is going to change, the data are going to change. How confident are you now in your ability to make changes to all of these data provisioning and analytics processes when things change? When a CR comes in that says, all right, this is different now, and I need you to refresh the MART in the report. What does that look like now?
That's become the easy part, honestly. You always have things changing around you, like system changes. Say IT department deploys a change, and it's completely different than the way you used to look at the data. We definitely understand how we're looking at the data now. It's easy to analyze the change they're making, and we can just make that change. And most of the changes, I can't think of, a severe change that couldn't be done in less than a couple hours, where we could then have a new data mart tomorrow based on a particular change. So if there's a customer request coming in that needs us to expand a data mart or build a new data mart, depending on those requirements, we might see that bump out. But if it's something has changed in our environment, we need to adapt to that change. It's very quick to get in the tool, discover the change, validate the change, and then get that change deployed so that we can get it in there for tomorrow or the day after.
Good news.
It is good news.
So we're almost up at time here, as agile as we've been with Q&A. We got about a minute left. There was a question that came in from the audience that I wanted to ask, because I think it's really germane and encapsulating everything you just said. How did you gradually introduce these processes while at the same time having to keep the business running, right? You can't just shift everybody over. You still have to satisfy other reporting or data context that can't shift over. How did you layer this stuff in over time and fix the wings while the plane was in the air?
Yeah, I kind of sequestered one of our architects on the team and myself, and we kind of, as we started to see where this could go, we kind of pulled ourselves away from some of the daily activity. You can't get away from it all, especially escalations and such, but we tried to hunker down and understand where we wanted to take the architecture, how we needed to build those checks, balances in. So we built the BI tool set, and when we realized we needed to do this, and those mechanisms and dependencies and all those things, we built those tools in place And then we rolled it out to my team so that we can start taking new requests on the new architecture. There's no flip the switch. There was no big project design like, oh, we got to convert every report. There's still old reports running out there. There's still some old stuff out there, but is it as important as the answers we're trying to get out of the new BI platform? No. So we focus and make sure we stay tied to what the executives are trying to solve for. That's really where we try and spend our time. And when old things break, that's when we look, okay, is it time to bring that into the MART? Or should we leave it out there? Is there a reason to leave it out there? Can we bring it in quickly? That's when we assess those type of things. We never went and said we're going to convert everything over. It was always that organic process. Make sure we bring it in when it's ready to come in.
But to extrapolate it, you got a person, you sort of dedicated someone to that parallel activity so they could be outside of the critical path of those existing processes.
Absolutely, yeah. And he still got pulled into other things at times, but that's you have to manage that, right? You got to keep the business running, like you said, or whoever asked the question. You can't jeopardize the business for a report. You have to make sure you can keep everybody happy. It's a juggling act sometimes.
Keeping everybody happy. All right, I think we're gonna have to end on that note because we're at about 45 minutes. Thank you, Carrie, so much for sharing your experiences, and thanks to everyone who has joined this conversation. If you have any follow-up questions, I've got a screen up here where you can send them to us, and we'll certainly communicate with Carrie or any feedback from this webinar. So thanks again to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.